So welcome to Red Deer Public Library's Travel Memories program for December. My name's Priscilla, and I'm part of the programming staff at Red Deer Public Library. In the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories and of the Métis of Region 3, traditional and customary lands of First Nations and Métis people. So today's presenter is Gerry Feehan. And Gerry is a retired lawyer, and he and his wife Florence moved to Kimberley last spring from Red Deer. They're avid travelers, and this will be their 5th time sharing photos and stories with our Travel Memories group. So previously they talked about the Yukon, Bhutan, Kenya, Rwanda, Zanzibar, and last spring, Egypt. And now we have them back to talk about Newfoundland. So, Gerry, I just want to start out by saying that volunteers like you are what make our program special, and we're sure grateful for you coming back, and particularly this time because you're currently in Puerto Basque in Sonora, Mexico, on the Sea of Cortez. How is that going?
It's going just great.
That's your motorhome?
That's our motorhome, yeah. Well, we waited for the announcement regarding the land border opening, and as soon as that announcement was made, we packed up our motorhome and we left Kimberley about 3 weeks ago. And we've been driving through the US for that period of time, and then I came up with this really crazy idea that Florence isn't too enamored about, to whip over the border into Mexico and come down to the Sea of Cortez. And so we are now camping on the beach in Mexico. It is 27 degrees above, there's no wind. We're watching the pelicanos fly by every day from our seats while we watch the sun go down. And getting across the border it went a little bit like this. We came up to the border and the lady goes, "Andere, andere, 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 keep on moving." So hopefully we won't have any problem getting back into the US, because we are, of course, double vaccinated, and there shouldn't be any problem. The border's open as of today. So we're just gonna be here for a few days and then cross back. And if we have a problem, my wife is really gonna be mad at me.
Well, you're always up for an adventure. So before we start, I just want to mention that Gerry's photographs and writing have won him much recognition, most recently for the Best People Photograph category at the Travel Media Association of Canada's annual national conference and awards last June. And you can find out more about that on Gerry's blog, and I think he'll mention that at the end of this talk. And there's the other information about his recognition for his writing and photography there too.
So about, I guess it was 4 years ago actually, Florence and I drove our motorhome from North Sydney, Nova Scotia, took the ferry over into Puerto Basque, which is down here. There's the ferry that lands Puerto Basque, and we traveled for 2 weeks in Newfoundland, and we basically sort of had 4 highlights. We visited Gros Morne National Park, which is in this region here. Then we went up to the north, which is where Meadows is. That's where Leif Erikson landed. I wanted to see that. It's the, of course, oldest European settlement in North America. After that, we worked our way across the island towards St. John's, which is here. We then toured what's called the Irish Loop, this section down here in the Avalon Peninsula. And then we sort of finished over here in Trinity, and we had some interesting experiences in all of those places. I'll share the pictures and some stories with you. And then we hustled all the way back over to Puerto Basque and caught the ferry. This was in the middle of October, and from there we then went to Cape Breton, and then we followed the coastline all the way down through New Brunswick, Maine, all the US states, all the way down to Georgia. So that was what we did in the fall of 2017, I think it was. So our first stop was in Brook. And it was Maritime Fall, absolutely spectacular. When we got off the ferry at Puerto Basque, this older fellow who had regaled me with stories all across from the ferry as I was trying to avoid vomiting, he was telling us stories about how he had all of his fish was in the freezer and his moose meat was in the freezer. And then as we left the ferry, he turned to me and he motioned me with a gnarly finger and he said, I rolled down the window and he said, "Safe travels, my son, and don't drive at night. The moose will be so thick, you'll be pushing them out of the way." It turns out we didn't see any moose for a long time. And so, of course, when you go to Newfoundland, you want to see moose. We eventually saw our share, but it took a little while and they weren't quite so abundant as this man made out them to be. So we encountered this in Brook with the beautiful fall colors. And then as we headed north, we then went to Gros Morne National Park. And we stopped at the Humber Valley Golf Course, which is ranked number 6 in Canada. Then we began to see these seaside fishing villages. And we stopped in Gros Morne, which is an incredibly diverse place. It's really remarkable. These are pitcher plants, which are an ancient species that can grow in the acidic soil of the tablelands, which is in the south part of Gros Morne National Park. This is a place where the Earth's crust has risen to the surface. And the rocks there, the surface there is some of the oldest soil on Earth, oldest rocks. It's extremely acidic and only plants like these pitcher plants can survive there. The rock there is, I think, in the neighborhood of 3 or 4 billion years old. And it's the only place on Earth where it's located. And then across Bonne Bay is where the majority of the Gros Morne National Park lies. And we had been warned by the lady at the visitor center that we might run into Tic Tac as we were climbing up Gros Morne, and this was the day before. It turns out we had a beautiful day, but these are my experiments. I love doing this time-lapse photography, where you basically just put the camera in place, you leave it there, you start your time-lapse, and you let it go for approximately 5 minutes or so. And if you have, like in the previous photograph or the previous little video, if you happen to have the clouds moving, you get a really neat effect. In this case, I had hustled up the mountain ahead of Florence and then was recording her as she scrambled up. This is about 5 minutes of hard work on her part. So Gros Morne is the namesake of the park is the mountain Gros Morne, which is about 3,000 feet high, but it starts at sea level, so that means your climb is actually 3,000 feet. But the beginning of it is just a sort of a narrow hike through conifers and normal vegetation. And then you end up coming through that boulder area, which is the very difficult part of the hike. And then after you've bouldered your way up that, you come out onto this, which is the top of Gros Morne. And it's just basically flat, rocky tundra. It's actually tundra, even though it's located on the island of Newfoundland, which is not that far north. You are actually into a tundra environment where there are caribou and there are critters like this, which is a ptarmigan, and it's just changing color for winter. And yeah, 806 meters is the top. This is one of my favorite pictures that I've taken. This is from the precipice on Gros Morne, and that is a 3,000 foot straight descent down onto 10 Mile Pond, it's called. And 10 Mile Pond is one of the finger lakes of Gros Morne, which are actually fjords, but as you can see, they actually have been capped off. So they were part of the ocean at one time, and they evolved through glaciation to become fjords. But then due to uplifting, they were closed off and became lakes. And so there's a series of these lakes, and they are absolutely spectacular. Then the descent was just around the other side, and it's a long day. I think it's probably 7 or 8 hours of climbing, and it was a beautiful thing to do. And we had a lovely day, although it was very, very cold and very windy up there. Probably just slightly above freezing. This is very typical rocky beach, ancient fishing villages. This is another nice hiking day in Newfoundland. That's very typical weather. It's actually quite warm in the beginning of October. The temperature was, although one of the tropical storms had just destroyed Florida and the southern US, and the remnants of that came up into Newfoundland, and the temperature actually went from a highs of about 8 to highs of 14 or 15 or 16 with huge precipitation. So even though it was the middle of October, early October, the temperature actually jumped significantly, but so did the wind. It was very treacherous. And so if you're gonna hike in Newfoundland in October, it's a really good time to go, by the way. It was very quiet. The campgrounds were mostly open, some weren't, but it was very quiet. We didn't have to fight tourists. We did have to deal with some of the things not being open. Probably, ideally, I would say if you wanted to go to Newfoundland, September, middle September would be a really good time to go, or maybe in June, although all of my Newfoundland friends tell me that the spring come very late and the falls stay very long. So we actually hit weather the weather was really quite good. In Newfoundland, it is customary, of course, to attend a kitchen party and to kiss the cod. There's Florence kissing the frozen cod. She's permitted me to publish that photograph. I met the host of the kitchen party, a guy by the name of Dave Shears, and he said to me, you know, Newfoundlanders they have a ceilidh in the kitchen every night. Everybody's musical. They're very inclusive with music, and he said, if anybody wants to come up and play something, come on up. So I went and played a few songs, and Dave Shears, the host, came up to me afterwards, and he said, well, stick around and strum a few after the others have left there, Gerry. We'll talk about this and that and have a cuffer. And so we stayed until the late hours, until the bar doors were well barred, and we cuffed on and on into the wee hours. That was a fun night, but a rough next day. Unfortunately, the next day entailed climbing onto a boat, which for me isn't a great thing. This is Western Brook Pond. So if that photograph I took of Gros Morne this is not the same viewpoint, but it's roughly would be identical to having the photograph taken from up here and straight down. So these are about 750-meter cliffs, and they are really beautiful. You have to walk about 2 kilometers from the parking lot to get to Western Brook Pond. If the weather is foul, they'll say, sorry, we're not sailing today, and they'll turn you around and send you back. So you'll have an hour's worth of traversing for nothing. But on the other hand, you are traversing across peat bogs and with wooden structures elevated above the peat bogs, beautiful flowers, lots of animals and stuff. And then you arrive at this, and you climb onto this, and you sail up the fjord. And this is the first mate here. And the Newfoundlanders are so musical that they just can't help but bring out the spoons, and any opportunity to play music there, it's going to happen. So again, I got to play music while I was rocking and reeling on the boat, trying to keep lunch down. So that was our adventure in Gros Morne. Then we moved up the coast. This is down the coast, they say in Newfoundland. Though we would say if you're going north, we would say you're going up the coast. But for Newfoundlanders, because you're going further away from civilization, they say you're going down coast. So as we head along the westernmost part of Newfoundland Island, the Rock, which is where Gros Morne is located, we were able to get to Lansa Meadow on the very northern tip in a single day, although it was into that galing, horrible wind that I was talking about. And the wind, when our motorhome was going straight into the wind, it wasn't a problem. But with the road turned and the wind was coming sideways, I felt like we were going to go straight into a ditch. And I did have a moose step up in front of me also, and that nearly resulted in the death of the moose and 2 Albertans, but I managed to avoid it. There's a beautiful little park called Arches Provincial Park en route. And then also on the way is where you catch the ferry to go to Labrador. And this is Lansa Meadow. And we stayed at the Viking RV park, and we were the only ones there. And the office was closed and abandoned, basically. And there, in the morning, I noticed there was a can outside of the office that said off-season $25 per night in a bucket. So I threw my $25 in, and we drove the last few remaining kilometers to get to the Meadows National Historic Site. Leif Erikson was a Norse explorer, and together with a small group of intrepid fellow Viking seafarers, they landed here around 1000 AD. They strategically chose this spot near the Strait of Belle Isle, within sight of Labrador. They called the place Vinland, the land where wild grapes grow. Setting up a sturdy encampment of turf-walled buildings, they explored for hardwood lumber, iron ore, and arable land. There is actually the faint remains of the original sod buildings there, and a charcoal kiln which produced iron from bog iron, which was not very good iron. But they actually left the area after only a decade or two. We don't know why, but probably it was inhospitable, and they may have had, there is suggestion that the native population was not friendly to them, but they were Vikings after all. But we had a really hilarious time with these 2 people here. I started talking with this young lady. She's dressed, as you can see, in the Viking attire. He's whittling a talisman. The Newfoundlanders are the friendliest, most outgoing people in the world. When I asked the young woman if she lived nearby, her Parks Canada persona evaporated like Tic Tac, and the talk immediately turned to the upcoming weekend, her 2 hard-earned days off and fall berry picking. I was born just over that side of the harbour. My father ran trawler fished here, the fish ran out. In Newfoundland, fish means cod, and everything else, haddock, flounder, plaice, etc., is known by its common name. If you say fish, you're talking about cod. She winked and she said, growing up, it was always cold in the house. In winter, we'd have to open the fridge to warm the place. Excuse me if my accent is a bit more Irish than Newfoundlandish, but sometimes there's very subtle distinctions, especially in the Irish loop of Ireland, of Newfoundland, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. We were trying to buy some jam, and the 2 choices are partridge berry or baked apple jam. I tasted both of them. I thought they were absolutely horrible. Didn't like them at all, as did my Viking fellow there. But she disagreed vehemently, and she said, oh, me nerves, he's got me drove. Apparently partridge berry picking was on her weekend agenda. In an effort to change the subject, I asked whether the town of Kirpon or Great Brahat, just down the coast, were worth a visit. They both laughed at me, and she said, oh, I die, you 2. Nothing will label you as a tourist in Newfoundland like the mispronunciation of local names. Kirpon, which is spelled Q-I-R-P-O-N, is Carpoon, and Great Brahat, Great B-R-E-H-A-T, is pronounced Great Bra. Luckily, I didn't inquire about fairyland. Then she asked us where we're from. We told her we're from Alberta. She said, I've got a brother in Fort McMurray, and I can report, in all honesty, we did not meet a single Newfoundlander who did not have at least one family member who was working out west. By the way, I asked some people whether or not I could use the word Newfie in my stories, and I thought perhaps it was pejorative, but I got mixed answers. Some of, depending whether they were rural or urban responders, some thought it was just fine to call them a Newfie, and some thought it was offensive. So discretion being the better part of valor, I have not used the word Newfie anyway. I tried to get this young woman back to the biking thing, but she was like, she was off. And so all pretense of the 11th century Norse woman was abandoned. She continued talking about her husband, the small family garden, and the incessant rain on the rock. And there was himself last night, she continued, lo, standing in the downpour, coat open, staring at Lord knows what, sopped to the skin and stunned as me arse. Then she politely resumed her bonnet and kept weaving. What an experience. We drove back down the coast. It's a return trip back basically through Gros Morne. Newfoundlanders stacked their wood for the winter on the side of the road. Along the road, there are piles of wood like this everywhere. And I asked that woman, I said, well, whose wood is that? Well, everybody knows who the wood belongs to, she said. And I said, well, what would stop me from taking some of it? She said, if you took some wood, everybody would know that you took it, and that'd be the end of that. So they are not only hilarious and reliable, but also extremely honest. When I told a friend that we were, and she was born and raised in Newfoundland, that we are going to only explore the west side of Newfoundland, I thought, let's not bite off more than we can chew. She said, well, if you haven't walked down Water Street in St. John's, you haven't been to Newfoundland. So that immediately resulted in us changing our plans. So we spent 1 week in the west, which was basically Gros Morne and Meadows and Puerto Basque, corner Brook. And we headed east across the island about 500 kilometers through we went up to the Bonavista Peninsula. We caught some cod fishermen. That, my loves, is a cod. That is what it's all about. This fella immediately stopped what he was doing, said, would you like some fish? Cod, of course. I said, that would be lovely. He cut a piece of this fish for me. And I said, what do I owe you? He said, nothing, me son, just safe travels. And we had a lovely dinner of cod that night. Generous on top of everything else. Joey Smallwood was the last father of Confederation. Newfoundland became the province in 1949. Joey is both revered and hated in Newfoundland for lots of different reasons, but he is still a hero. 1949, he convinced the Newfoundlanders to join Confederation. Of course, financially, it was a good decision. Newfoundland was in economic downturn. And this Joey's lookout is just as you go through the narrow isthmus, which connects the eastern portion of Newfoundland with the west part. So we made it to St. John's, which is a colorful, lovely, frolicking town. But after a few days of great seafood, great live music, an exploration of the fascinating Rooms Museum, where Sergeant Tommy Ricketts is honored as the only Newfoundlander ever to have been awarded the Victoria Cross for services rendered in the Great War of 1918. We moved on and we went to Signal Hill, which is a fortress designed hundreds of years ago as a lookout for enemies coming in. Also, it was the place where Marconi received the first Morse code from Europe. They tried to do it in the United States in New York, but it wouldn't reach that far. So that is the place right there where Marconi received the first Norse code from transatlantically. The other reason we left St. John's after just a few days is that motorhomes and bumpy cobblestone roads don't go along very well together. So we needed to get back out into the country roads. We then, that's just a little artistic shot of the motorhome at Cape Spear. Cape Spear is the easternmost lighthouse in Canada and in fact in North America. It is probably closer to Dublin than it is to Vancouver, although I might be just making that up. But it is a long ways across our fair country. While at the museum there, I asked a Celtic looking fella if we were planning on driving down to the Irish Loop, which is the southern portion of the Avalon Peninsula. And I asked this fella if he had any recommendations for things to do. And I asked him if he was Irish, and he looked at me askance. And I thought, oh, I've got the red hair wrong. But he said Scottish, actually, so I didn't miss by much. He stroked his sandy beard, and he said, after disavowing any Irish ancestry, the Avalon Peninsula is beautiful. Just, you can't go wrong. Just poke along, just poke along. And poke along we did. So we spent a number of days just poking along. These are battlements from the Second World War. This is Petty Harbour, which is one of the most famous harbors in Newfoundland, if not the most famous. These are low tide, obviously. Then we got onto the Irish Loop, and we ran across our first genuine experience with moose. And it went a little bit like this. It was opening day for moose hunting. And this family, 3 generations, had just bagged their moose, which was going to feed the family for the winter. And the Newfoundlanders take their moose hunting very, very seriously. This is not just for fun. This meat is going into the freezer. And what this is called the parging of the moose. Parging? And I learned that in Newfoundland, there's no need to do anything in a conversation other than begins with some perfunctory introductions, because they will take it from there. Listening after that will suffice. And I'm not sure you're going to be able to hear this really well, but I'd like you to just, this is one of the reasons that I was apologizing for having my Newfoundland accent sound a little bit Irish, because in the Irish Loop, the people sound like this.
Say that again. What did you say?
Said we've been coming here this 35 years. We used to log them out on our back first when we started.
Oh, before the quads.
Before the quads.
Oh, okay.
So we've 10 years logging them out on our backs.
So you're logging up? So they've been logging them out on their back for 35 years. Newfoundlanders are extremely proud Canadians. Not that Albertans and New British Columbia people aren't as well, but they are very proud Canadians, and they very often, we saw these 2 flags flying, which is the flag of Newfoundland and the flag of Canada. The flag of Canada is flying higher, but proudly displayed is the flag of Newfoundland. And also in the Irish Loop, you'll also see the Newfoundland tricolor flag, which is a flag of green, white, and pink, very much like the flag of Ireland, except it's got the pink on the last part rather than green. And it is the pre-1949 Dominion of Canada flag. And I think it's flown not out of pride like a Confederacy flag or something like that, but more nostalgically to, anyways, we saw those primarily in the Avalon Peninsula in the Irish Loop.
Along the Irish Loop, we were in Newfoundland in the, as I said, beginning of October. A lot of people go to Newfoundland to see Atlantic puffins along the Irish Loop, and also icebergs calving going by. So if you want to see the puffins nesting, if you want to see icebergs calving, you pretty much need to go towards the end of June. That's when those activities are most likely to be encountered. When we were there in October, the puffins were long gone and the glaciers had long since melted. Okay, the word is paunch. They're paunching the carcass. So the older fellow here, the oldest, the patriarch, he asked me, he said, "Where are you two headed?" And I said, "Toward Trapacy," which you would think was called Trapacy, but I learned it's Trapacy. And he said, "Trapacy, Trapacy. Did you know Trapacy is in the Guinness Book of World Records as the foggiest place on Earth? Why, just last year, a woman gave birth, but it was 3 months before they could tell if it was a boy or a girl." And all the rest of them laughed heartily at the same joke he's been telling everybody from off the rock, from away, for the last 65 years. So we drove into the Tic Tac down at Trapacy and Fairland and rounded the bottom of the Irish Loop, looking for lunch. Everything was closed. We came upon a parking lot jammed with vehicles with this sign. We saw a lot of these signs, "Chase the Ace," and it's basically a form of legalized gambling, but everybody, you see the pot is up to $5,950. And the entire community will go to the local hall or church after Mass and go for the Chase the Ace. And if you want to know what Chase the Ace is, look it up. But it involves trying to get an ace from a pack. Just up the street, we were starving. We had no food in the fridge. There was no stores open. We found a little store. We were kind of had our hearts set on cooking some fish or having some seafood, but nothing was open. The restaurants were all closed. It was a Sunday, wrong time of day, wrong time of year. We went into a grocery store, and what we ended up with was 2 beautiful Newfoundland steaks. A Newfoundland steak is bologna cut that thick. And at the recommendation of the proprietress, I had the steaks cut thick and not cut thin. That is our loop. I'm going to go back to the map. Again, we landed in Puerto Basque, went by Brook and Deer Lake, hung a left. This is where Gros Morne is located. Then it's about 400 kilometers, 300 kilometers up to above St. Anthony, right here, which is where Meadows is. From there, we drove all the way back down. We diddled and fiddled and all sorts of things through here. We were told Fogo Island was a great place to go, but we did not have sufficient time. We went to Bonavista Bay and checked it out for a day. And then we went through this isthmus here, which is where the viewpoint for Joey Smallwood is. Then to St. John's for a few days. Then we did down the loop, up, back this way in the Avalon Peninsula, back across here. And then we went to Trinity Bay. Now, we had been invited to something called a Jiggs Dinner. Terra Nova National Park is located right here. And on our way through there, we ran into a couple named Bevan Berkey. And that was on Friday or Thursday. And they were, we were told by the park ranger when we arrived, I said, "I'd like some wood for a fire." And the ranger said, no, that's not necessary. There's no sense in you paying for wood. The folks in Site 17 just bought a big load. Just go over and join them at their fire. And that's what we did. We brought our chairs over, and before I could put my chair down, Berkey had poured a drink, a nice rum and coke for me, and we were sitting by their fire, and I brought my ukulele along, and we played into the wee hours of the morning. In the next morning, Bev and Berkey said, Thanksgiving is this Monday, and we're having all of our kids and some family come to Terra Nova, the campground, for Jiggs Dinner. And I said, well, what is Jiggs Dinner? Jiggs Dinner is a complicated meal involving a whole bunch of ingredients, which I'll tell you about momentarily. And they immediately invited us to join them for Jiggs Dinner on Monday. So we were coming, this was on our way through the first time. We still had to do all this exploring. So I said, yes, for sure, we'll be there Monday. But if Newfoundlanders weren't so damn friendly, we'd have been on time for our Jiggs Dinner, because what happened is we diverted up to Trinity Bay on Monday, en route to meet Bev and Berkey back at the campground. And when we arrived in Trinity, I always have a tendency to drive right down to the local dock and see what's going on. In this case, the local dock was on a ramp that narrowed and narrowed and narrowed and narrowed, and then became ocean. And I ended up getting myself in a position where I couldn't do anything. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't do anything. I really couldn't do anything. A boat pulled up beside me, bobbing in the ocean. And the fella said, looks like you could use a little bit of help there, guy. So he directed me on backing off the ramp as my tires were slipping on the slime. And I got backed up and I went over to say thank you to him. And turns out his name was Skipper Bob. And he and his wife run something called Trinity Eco Tours. And he said to me, I'm going to jump ahead now. We arrived in Trinity Bay, and Skipper Bob said, well, what are you doing today? And I said, well, we're heading back to Terra Nova for Jiggs Dinner. He said, well, it's the end of the season, and I'm just taking my wife and some family out for an eco tour. Would you and your wife like to join us? This is after he helped me off the dock. So I said, yes, I would like to do that. But I said, we have to be back at the dock by noon, because we have to get to Terra Nova for Jiggs Dinner. He said, no, that won't be a problem. So I said, well, how much does it cost? And he says, well, normally it's $90 a person, but it's this time of year, we wouldn't take any money from it. So again, this generosity showed its head, its lovely head, and we jumped on the boat with Skipper Bob and the Trinity Eco Tours group, and we toured Trinity Bay looking at cod fishermen. There's Skipper Bob. We saw whales, we saw lots of things, we saw lots of birds. And then he took us to a place called Ireland's Eye. And what happened is that back in the 50s, Newfoundland was dispersed. There was no roads. Everybody was connected by the ocean. The roads to these various spots are very, very impractical. And all of the Newfoundlanders were connected not by road, but by villages on sea villages. And they would boat from village to village. And that's how they go to school. That's how they communicated. That's how they became isolated enough to develop different accents. But the Newfoundland government decided that in the mid-1950s, they began a resettlement program to get people who lived on these remote islands to move to the mainland, where there'd be better access to services like hospitals and schools. In some respects, it was a forced relocation. Skipper Bob's father was compelled with his family to move to a larger center. They actually floated the house from Ireland's Eye to a larger center. And then they called it a soapbox house. And then they renovated it, and the house is still there, family home was still there. But life on the rock 50 years ago was hard. Well, by the time we got back to the pier, we were running late. I hit the pedal to the metal, and by the time we got back to Terra Nova for Jiggs Dinner, Berkey and Bev were packed up. All the family was gone. They were getting ready to leave. And I apologized. I said, I'm so sorry. Bev said to me, she said, you said you were coming for scoff, so I knew you'd be here. I did up a couple of plates and they're still warm. A traditional Newfoundland Jiggs dinner. Remember, this was done in a campground. This meal was prepared in a campground. It consists of turkey, dressing, gravy, bread pudding, carrots, turnip, cabbage, mashed potatoes, peas pudding, figgy duff, and boiled salt beef, which is crimped. Then we need dessert. For dessert, Barb likes to do blueberry crumble and partridge berry cake topped with a hot vanilla sauce. It's simple, really. So she prepared 2 plates large enough to feed a very large family. So we had Jiggs dinner, not just this night, but for the next 3 nights. And although it was a little bit like carrying coals to Newcastle, I did offer Berkey a couple of nice fillets of cod, which he graciously accepted. So now we are heading back. We drove all the way back across the rock, back to Puerto Basque, and caught the ferry, as I said, back to North Sydney on Cape Breton, where we had another incredible experience because it was Celtic Colours time, which is a music festival, music and arts festival on Cape Breton, which goes from about the 5th to the 15th of every October. We had a wonderful experience there. If you would like to read more of my stories, or if you'd like to see more of my pictures, you can go to that website. And there are a lot of stories there. And thank you so much for letting me share my time in the Mexican sun with our motorhome with you. I'm gonna go and have a cerveza on the sand beach. And would you like me to hit stop share now, Priscilla?
Sure, that would be great. That was lovely. I knew you'd have lots of good stories. So, you didn't talk about what kind of photography equipment you use to get all those wonderful shots.
I changed cameras a little bit, but you know, I'd say half the pictures are taken with an iPhone.
They are okay.
Yep. I find that iPhone is good for landscape. It's good for outdoor photography. If you have good light, your iPhone is great. The mistake that I see a lot of people do is they'll try to take a picture of a bird from 50 feet away with their iPhone. That's not going to work. That's something I call the delete button. So if you're trying to get landscape, no problem. If you are trying to take a picture like the last one of the roadway, that one. So anyways, that picture that I showed of the roadway, that's a picture that you need to use a zoom feature for. So I have a good camera, it's a Sony mirrorless. And in order to get a picture like that, you have to get into position, you have to do like zoom a great deal. So if you're gonna take a picture of an animal, if you're gonna take a picture of a bird, if you're gonna take a picture of people that are a little bit distant, you need to have a zoom feature. And then also, if you have a wide angle lens, that can be handy for indoor photography. But basically, I rely on, if I want to take a picture of something distant, I use zoom. And if I want to just take a picture that's landscape oriented, I just use my phone.
Because the fog in that picture is so good too. So.
Yeah, and that with a phone, that picture would have been awful.
So what about the research you do before you go on your trip? Like, you ended up doing a lot of things different than you anticipated, but you must do some research. Do you, or you just
Oh, you know,
decide?
Gerry's idea of research is exactly what I did yesterday, which is to cross the border in a motorhome, have a campground in my GPS, which I had to load before we left because it wasn't going to work after I got into Mexico because we didn't have cell service. Drive to that spot, see if there's a spot available, turn off the ignition, and get out and pop a cerveza.
Okay.
And so that, I mean, I knew that we wanted to go to Gros Morne. I knew that we wanted to go to Meadows. I never make reservations. We always travel in shoulder season. It always works out just great. And we have the luxury of being able to do that. Like I just never travel at Christmas, and I don't travel in the summertime. And if you have that option to be able to travel during those shoulder seasons, you do run the risk of things being closed. You do run the risk of having missed the best time of year for whatever. But the beginning of October in Newfoundland is pretty darn nice, and we had nobody to compete with. So we just fly by the seat of our pants every single day.
And it works so well for you. So what did you, was there a favorite spot? Favorite location?
I would say to every Canadian, go to Newfoundland because it will make you more proud to be a Canadian. Because it is, I've been to Ireland a couple of times. I have been to Newfoundland a couple of times. They're somewhat similar. The people are just so open and so funny and so endearing, and also sort of they don't suffer fools easily either. But it just makes you proud to be a Canadian, to go to Newfoundland and just realize that this is part of your country and that they're proud to be part of our country. It was a very, very good experience.
So do you think the motorhome is the best way to do it?
If you can, it's a long drive. Yeah, the motorhome was fantastic. If you were to fly there and rent a motorhome or fly, I guess for most people that's just maybe too expensive, or it's not convenient or whatever. But I guess if I was to develop an itinerary for people that didn't want to drive a motorhome or couldn't afford to rent one because it can be expensive, to fly to either St. John's or Deer by Corner Brook, Deer. There's an airport there. Rent a car and, just hotel it and just poke about. And you can just have some tremendous experiences. And you just can't go wrong in Newfoundland. You just turn down a road and just have an open agenda. And if you've got just a day to explore, if you've got a hotel somewhere and you've got a day just to explore on the road and come back to the hotel, you'll have a great day.
Good. I have someone ask if you've seen the play Come From Away.
I have, yes. I didn't understand the words.
Okay.
That's about the 9/11. Because what happened is that Gander, Newfoundland is the main airport there, which is also a military airport. And when 9/11 happened, of course, all of the access, there was a lot of planes in the air that were not allowed to land in the United States. And so a great number of transcontinental flights ended up getting diverted to Gander, where they landed. And the play is about how open the Newfoundlanders were to people who were stranded from all parts of the world and couldn't get home because of 9/11. Yeah. And it's a musical, and it was written by, I can't remember their names, but a husband and wife. Mm-hmm. And they had never written anything before. It all of a sudden went from they were unknowns to Broadway smash. Yeah. So,
and I hear it's back on Broadway, I think, now. So, which is good. Broadway is reopened. Yeah. So I have a couple of questions. You talked about chasing the ace. So the ace, is that a card?
Yeah, you can look. It's just basically glorified. It's like I probably get shot if a Newfoundlander heard me say this, but it's basically like bingo.
Oh, okay.
but it's a progressive pot.
Okay. Well, it was getting up there. It was nice. And Newfoundland steak, you said. So you got advice not to cook it one way or another, and I didn't understand that bit.
Well, it had to be cut tick, not cut tin.
I don't know what that means.
It's got to be cut tick, not cut tin.
Oh, thick and thin. Oh, okay. I was thinking you were saying like tin can or something. I see the problem I would have there.
Yeah, so if two Newfoundlanders are speaking to each other, you would have absolutely no idea what they were saying. And they have got, you should just go and just Google Newfoundland sayings. They are so funny. I've got that little flask I was holding up is covered with, it's like things like, how's she getting on, buddy?
So is that a souvenir that you got, that flask?
Yeah.
Did you get any other souvenirs?
I ate them all.
You ate them, okay. The best kind of souvenir. So traveling in general now is kind of stressful now. I wondered if you wanted to talk about that, how you've been doing some travel since COVID and...
Yeah, there's no, like traveling is stressful at the best of times. You know, if you're traveling intercontinentally or, you know, just driving across the border into the US or, you know, going somewhere exotic, just, you know, dealing with airports and security and all that stuff. It's, you know, and you know, having to get up early and being tired and, you know, if you're like me, if you're seasick from being on a boat or whatever, those things all make travel really, really difficult. But this new thing that we're going through now has made it twice as difficult. It's because, like, right now, my wife and I are sitting in Mexico because I said I'm going to Mexico to sit on the beach for a few days. But we now have to worry about getting our motorhome back across the border. The current rules simply say that we need to be double vaccinated. If you're crossing into the United States via land, the rules as of today are you just have to verbally attest to your being double vaccinated.
Wow.
Yeah, they don't ask. We didn't get asked when we crossed from British Columbia into Montana. We were verbally asked to confirm that we were double vaxxed, and they looked at our passports and they said, "Have a nice day." So that's what I anticipate happening in a few days when we cross back into the US from Mexico. But we're parking our motorhome in Arizona for the winter, and we're going to fly home in about a week to go for ski season in Kimberley. To get on the plane, we have to demonstrate double vaccination. Plus, we have to have what's called a negative PCR test, which is the complicated test. And it has to have been done no more than 72 hours prior to departure. So we have to find a place to get a test done. And Florence's sister-in-law is in Phoenix, so I think we'll find a place. You get the test, and then you have to sit on pins and needles waiting to make sure that that test arrives before you go to the airport. Because if it doesn't show up, you have to start all over again. You now have to go get another test. You have to rebook your flight. You have to cancel that flight. And, you know, those, and then the rules going from Canada on a plane in the US are different than because you just now currently, we flew to New York a month ago to visit my daughter. And to get on a plane in Canada to fly to the United States, the US rules for entry by air were that we needed to be double vaccinated and have an antigen test. And the antigen test is much simpler. You go to Shoppers Drug Mart, you give them $40. The test is done in half an hour. You get on the plane the next day. Living in Kimberley makes all these things more complicated because we don't have any of these facilities. So you got to drive to Calgary the night before. So, but I just said, screw it. You know, it's like I'm not going to live the rest of my life in a shell, worried and unwilling to go and do what I like to do, which is to see the world, when you can do it provided you're prepared to put up with all the obstacles and face a little bit of trepidation over things changing. But man, we all just lost a year and a half and it's not coming back. And it's been difficult for my travel writing. You know, newspapers aren't publishing, people aren't traveling. Like I've got a bunch of stories that haven't been published, you know, about going to Croatia. Who wants to read about a biking trip in Croatia right now? Like Nobody's going there, I don't think. Nobody's going to get on a cruise ship. So, yeah, those things are all difficult, but I'm on a beach in Mexico right now, and when we're done this, I'm going to have a beer.
Well, I think your birthday's right around this time, isn't it?
Yeah, next week. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good birthday present. And I was going to ask you about flying back because of all the what's happening in British Columbia right now, at least the western part of British Columbia. I think Kimberley's probably not having the same issues, but I didn't realize you flew into Calgary, so that would make it easier.
Yeah, no, we're flying back to Kimberley though. We are flying from Phoenix
okay.
to Calgary to Cranbrook, and it's actually not the flight itself. The flight times are not inconvenient. It's actually a good flight, but we don't have to. We don't have to go through any quarantine or anything like that, provided that we are demonstrate that we're double vaccinated before we get on the plane, that we have this negative test.
Yeah.
So
This new variant is changing things too. So.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I mean, I think this is a permanent thing. There's going to be stuff continuing to happen. So, I mean, my advice is if you want to travel, you better get vaccinated.
Yeah, it's true.
Otherwise,
so the motorhome that you have now is the same one as you had in Newfoundland, or?
Yeah.
Oh, so you must have a few miles on that.
Just turned over 100,000. Yeah.
That's great. But you're leaving it in Phoenix for a few months.
For about 4 months, yeah.
Hmm.
And then we'll drive back in the shoulder season. Yeah.
And what draws you back to Kimberley? You're a skier. Are you a cross-country skier or a downhill?
We just love Kimberley. That's our home now. We bought a house there. We bought a condo there 25 years ago. We've always just loved Kimberley, and we basically live on the ski hill. We live across the street from the golf course. So in the summertime we go golfing. In the wintertime we ski. But in November you can't do anything, and in April you can't do anything. So that's when we do a lot of our traveling, which, as I said, works out well because it's shoulder season and you don't need to make reservations.
Yeah, it's great. So what's next? I guess you'll head back in April or whatever to Phoenix and...
Yeah, we'll head back to Phoenix in April. We'll take probably 2 or 3 weeks to drive home. I always try taking a different road than I've taken before.
Oh, okay.
And if I see something interesting, I just turn and stay and go check it out.
So you'll drive back to Kimberley or back to Canada then?
Yeah, we'll be back in Kimberley by the 10th of May. And then we're currently making plans to go to Patagonia next November.
Oh, wow. Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, that's big.
That's a big trip.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah.
But I
Well,
mean,
that's wonderful.
yeah, it's great. I hope it happens, but you can't, I mean, there's just no point in trying to, you can't control any of this. So what you do is just make sure you make your plan A, make sure you have a plan B behind that. And if that doesn't work out, cancel and move on and do something else.
Plan C. Well, this is wonderful. Thank you so much, Gerry.
Yeah.
And you definitely inspired me to visit Newfoundland. It's been on my list for a long time, but really makes me think that I have to move it up the list.
Yeah. It's Canada, and it's also like in what we're going through right now. Although Newfoundland could be locked down, but with what we're going through right now, it does take away that the trepidation associated with international travel, because you're traveling in Canada, you're using Canadian currency, and it's just an amazing, wonderful place. But the weather sucks.
Yeah. Well, what is it the Norwegian or somebody says? There's no bad weather, only bad clothes.
Yeah, I asked him, I said, are you expecting rain? And he said, well, of course we're expecting rain.
Well, and they've just been hit too, haven't they, on the West Coast, on the East Coast with flooding too.
I actually haven't been paying attention for some.
Yeah, well, don't. Just look. So could you just give us a quick look out your window at the palm tree there?
Sure.
And then I'll let you go back to the beach and your cerveza. There we are. Lovely.
There's the campground. There's we can't see the ocean because my motorhome's blocking it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, take care. Thanks.